Chapter 9 of The Heritage of the Desert by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Scent of Desert Water. Soon the shepherds were left to a quiet unbroken by the whistle of wild mustangs, the whoop of hunters, the ring of iron-shod hoofs on the stones, the scream of an eagle, the bleating of sheep, the bark of a coyote were once more the only familiar sounds accentuating the silence of the plateau. For Hare, time seemed to stand still. He thought but little. His whole life was a matter of feeling from without. He rose at dawn, never failing to see the red sun tip the eastern crags. He glowed with the touch of cold spring water and the morning air. He trailed Silvermane under the cedars, and thrilled when the stallion, answering his call, thumped the ground with hobbled feet and came his way, learning day by day to be glad at the sight of his master. He rode with Mescal behind the flock. He hunted hour by hour, crawling over the fragrant brown mats of cedar, through the sage and juniper, up the grassy slopes. He rode back to camp beside Mescal, drove the sheep, and put Silvermane to his fleetest to beat Black Bolly down the level stretch where once the gray, even with freedom at stake, had lost to the black. Then back to camp and fire and curling blue smoke, a supper that testified to busy Piute's farmward trips, sunset on the rim, endless changing desert, the wind in the cedars, bright stars in the blue, and sleep. So time stood still. Mescal and Hare were together or never far apart from dawn till night. Until the sheep were in the corral, every moment had its duty, from camp work and care of horses to the many problems of the flock, so that they earned the rest on the rim wall at sundown. Only a touch of hands bridged the chasm between them. They never spoke of their love, of Mescal's future, of Jack's return to hearth. A glance and a smile, scarcely sad yet not altogether happy, was the substance of their dream. Where Jack had once talked about the canyon and desert, he now seldom spoke at all. From watching Mescal he had learned that the sea was enough, but there were moments when some association recalled the past, and the strangeness of the present faced him. Then he was wont to question Mescal. "What are you thinking of?" he asked curiously, interrupting their silence. She leaned against the rocks and kept a changeless, tranquil, unseeing gaze on the desert. The level eyes were full of thought, of sadness, of mystery. They seemed to look afar. Then she turned to him with puzzled, questioning look, an enigmatical reply. "Thinking?" asked her eyes. "I wasn't thinking," were her words. "I fancied. I don't know exactly what," he went on. "You look so earnest. Do you ever think of going to the Navajos?" "No." "Or across that painted desert to find some place you seem to know or see?" "No." "I don't know why, but Mescal, sometimes I have the queerest idea when I catch your eyes watching. You look at once happy and sad. You see something out there that I can't see. Your eyes are haunted. I've a feeling that if I looked into them I'd see the sun setting, the clouds coloring, the twilight shadows changing, and then, back of that, the secret of it all, of you. Oh, I can't explain, but it seems so." "I've never had a secret, except the one you know," she answered. "You ask me so often what I think about, and you always ask me when we're here." She was silent for a pause. "I don't think at all till you make me. It's beautiful out there, but that's not what it is to me. I can't tell you. When I sit down here, all within me is somehow stilled. I watch, and it's different from what it is now, since you've made me think. Then I watch and I see. That's all." It came to Hare afterward with a little start of surprise that Mescal's purposeless yet all satisfying watchful gaze had come to be part of his own experience. It was inscrutable to him, but he got from it a fancy which he tried in vain to dispel, that something would happen to them out there on the desert. And then he realized that when they returned to the campfire they seemed freed from this spell of the desert. The blaze-lit circle was shut in by the darkness and the immensity of their wild environment, because for the hour it could not be seen, lost its paralyzing effect. Hare fell naturally into a talkative mood. Mescal had developed a vivacity and ambition which contrasted strongly with her silent moods. She became alive and curious, human like the girls he had known in the East, and she fascinated him the more for this complexity. The July rains did not come, the mist failed, the dews no longer freshened the grass, and the hot sun began to tell on the shepherds and sheep. Both sought the shade. The flowers withered first, all the bluebells and lavender patches of primrose, and pale yellow lilies, and white thistle blossoms. Only the deep magenta of cactus and vermilion of Indian paintbrush, flowers of the sun, survived the heat. Day by day the shepherds scanned the sky for storm clouds that did not appear. The spring ran lower and lower. At last the ditch that carried water to the corral went dry, and the margin of the pool began to retreat. Then Mescal sent Piute down for August Naab. He arrived at the plateau the next day with Dave, and at once ordered the breaking up of camp. "It will rain sometime," he said, "but we can't wait any longer. Dave, when did you last see the Blue Star water hole?" "On the trip in from Silver Cup 10 days ago. The water hole was full then." "Will there be water enough now?" "We've got to chance it. There's no water here, and no springs on the upper range where we can drive the sheep. We've got to go round under the Star." "That's so," replied August. His fears needed confirmation, because his hopes always influenced his judgment till no hope was left. "I wish I had brought Zeke and George. It'll be a hard drive, though we've got Jack and Mescal to help." Hot as it was, August Naab lost no time in the start. Piute led the train on foot, and the flock, used to following him, got under way readily. Dave and Mescal rode along the sides, and August with Jack came behind, with the pack burros bringing up the rear. Wolf circled them all, keeping the flanks close in, heading the lambs that strayed, and, ever vigilant, made the drive orderly and rapid. The trail to the upper range was wide and easy of ascent, the first of it winding under crags, the latter part climbing long slopes. It forked before the summit, where dark pine trees showed against the sky, one fork ascending, the other, which Piute took, beginning to go down. It admitted of no extended view, being shut in for the most part on the left. But there were times when Hare could see a curving stream of sheep on a half a mile of descending trail. Once started down, the flock could not be stopped. That was as plain as Piute's hard task. There were times when Hare could have tossed a pebble on the Indian just below him. There were more than 3,000 sheep strung out in line between them. Clouds of dust rolled up, sheets of gravel and shale rattled down the inclines. The clatter, clatter, clatter of little hoofs, the steady baa, baa, baa filled the air. Save for the crowding of lambs off the trail and a jamming of sheep in the corners, the drive went on without mishap. Hare was glad to see the lambs scramble back, bleating for their mothers, and to note that, though peril threatened at every steep turn, the steady downflow always made space for the sheep behind. He was glad, too, when through a wide break ahead his eyes followed the face of a vast cliff down to the red ground below, and he knew the flock would soon be safe on the level. A blast as from a furnace smote Hare from this open break in the wall. The air was dust laden, and carried besides the smell of dust and the warm breath of desert growths a dank odor that was unpleasant. The sheep massed in a flock on the level, and the drivers spread to their places. The route lay under projecting red cliffs between the base and enormous sections of wall that had broken off and fallen far out. There was no weathering slope. The wind had carried away the smaller stones and particles, and had cut the huge pieces of pinnacle and tower into hollowed forms. The zone of rim merged into another of strange contrast. The sloping red stream of sand which flowed from the wall of the canyon. Piute swung the flock up to the left into an amphitheater, and there halted. The sheep formed a densely packed mass in the curve of the wall. Dave Naab galloped back toward August and Hare, and before he reached them shouted out, "The water hole's plugged!" "What?" yelled his father. "Plugged, filled with stone and sand." "Was it a cave-in?" "I reckon not. There's been no rain." August spurred his roan after Dave, and Hare kept close behind them, till they reined in on a muddy bank. What had once been a water hole was a red and yellow heap of shale, fragments of stone, gravel, and sand. There was no water, and the sheep were bleating. August dismounted and climbed high above the hole to examine the slope. Soon he strolled down with giant steps, his huge fists clenched, shaking his gray mane like a lion. "I've found the tracks. Somebody climbed up and rolled the stones, started the cave in. Who?" "Holderness's men. They did the same for Martin Cole's water hole at Rocky Point." "How old are the tracks?" "2 days, perhaps. We can't follow them." "What can be done?" "Some of Holderness's men are Mormons, and others are square fellows. They wouldn't stand for such work as this, and somebody ought to ride in there and tell him." "And get shot up by the men paid to do the dirty work?" "No, I wouldn't hear of it. This amounts to nothing. We seldom use this hole, only twice a year when driving the flock. But it makes me fear for Silver Cup and Seeping Springs." "It makes me fear for the sheep if this wind doesn't change." "Ah, I'd forgotten the river scent. It's not strong tonight. We might venture if it weren't for the strip of sand. We'll camp here and start the drive at dawn." The sun went down under a crimson veil. A doe glow spread fan-shaped upward. Twilight faded to darkness with the going down of the wind. August Naab paced to and fro before his tired and thirsty flock. "I'd like to know," said Hare to Dave, "why those men filled up this water hole." "Holderness wants to cut us off from Silver Cup Spring, and this was a halfway water hole. Probably he didn't know we had the sheep upland, but he wouldn't have cared. He's set himself to get our cattle range, and he'll stop at nothing. Prospects look black for us. Father never gives up. He doesn't believe yet that we can lose our water. He prays and hopes and sees good and mercy in his worst enemies. If Holderness works as far as Silver Cup, how will he go to work to steal another man's range and water?" "He'll throw up a cabin, send in his men, drive in 10,000 steers." "Well, will his men try to keep you away from your own water or your cattle?" "Not openly. They'll pretend to welcome us and drive our cattle away in our absence. You see, there are only 5 of us to ride the ranges, and we need 5 times 5 to watch all the stock." "Then you can't stop this outrage?" "There's only one way," said Dave, significantly tapping the black handle of his Colt. "Holderness thinks he pulls the wool over our eyes by talking of the cattle company that employs him. He's the company himself, and he's hand and glove with Dene." "And I suppose if your father and you boys were to ride over to Holderness' newest stand and tell him to get off, there would be a fight?" "We'd never reach him now, that is, if we went together. One of us alone might get to see him, especially in White Sage. If we all rode over to his ranch, we'd have to fight his men before we reached the corrals. You yourself will find it pretty warm when you go out with us on the ranges, and if you make White Sage, you'll find it hot. You're called Dene's spy there, and the rustlers are still looking for you. I wouldn't worry about it, though." "Why not, I'd like to know?" inquired Hare, with a short laugh. "Well, if you're like the other Gentiles who have come into Utah, you won't have scruples about drawing on a man. Father says the draw comes natural to you, and you're as quick as he is. Then he says you can beat any rifle shot he ever saw, and that long-barreled gun you've got will shoot a mile. So if it comes to shooting, why, you can shoot. If you want to run, who's going to catch you on that white-maned stallion? We talked about you, George and I, and we're mighty glad you're well and can ride with us." Long into the night Jack Hare thought over this talk. It opened up a vista of the range life into which he was soon to enter. He tried to silence the voice within that cried out, eager and reckless, for the long rides on the windy open. The years of his illness returned in fancy. The narrow room with the lamp and the book, and the tears over stories and dreams of adventure never to be for such as he. And now how wonderful was life! It was, after all, to be full for him. It was already full. Already he slept on the ground, open to the sky. He looked up at a wild black cliff, mountain high, with its wind-worn star of blue. He felt himself on the threshold of the desert. With that subtle mystery waiting, he knew himself to be close to strenuous action on the ranges, companion of these somber Mormons, exposed to their peril, making their cause his cause, their life his life. What of their friendship, their confidence? Was he worthy? Would he fail at the pinch? What a man he must become to approach their simple estimate of him! Because he had found health and strength, because he could shoot, because he had the fleetest horse on the desert, were these reasons for their friendship? No, these were reasons only for their trust. August Naab loved him. Mescal loved him. Dave and George made of him a brother. "They shall have my life," he muttered. The bleating of the sheep heralded another day. With the brightening light began the drive over the sand. Under the cliff the shade was cool and fresh. There was no wind. The sheep made good progress. But the broken line of shade crept inward toward the flock and past it. The sun beat down and the wind arose. A red haze of fine sand eddied about the toiling sheep and shepherds. Piute trudged ahead, leading the king ram, old Socker, the leader of the flock. Mescal and Hare rode at the right, turning their faces from the sand-filled puffs of wind. August and Dave drove behind. Wolf, as always, took care of the stragglers. An hour went by without signs of distress, and with half the 5-mile trip at his back, August Naab's voice gathered cheer. The sun beat hotter. Another hour told a different story. The sheep labored. They had to be forced by urge of whip, by knees of horses, by Wolf's threatening bark. They stopped altogether during the frequent hot sand blasts, and could not be driven. So time dragged. The flock straggled out to a long, irregular line. Rams refused to budge till they were ready. Sheep lay down to rest. Lambs fell. But there was an end to the belt of sand, and August Naab at last drove the lagging trailers out upon the stony bench. The sun was about 2 hours past the meridian. The red walls of the desert were closing in. The V-shaped split where the Colorado cut through was in sight. The trail now was wide and unobstructed, and the distance short, yet August Naab ever and anon turned to face the canyon and shook his head in anxious foreboding. It quickly dawned upon Hare that the sheep were behaving in a way new and singular to him. They packed densely now, crowding forward, many raising their heads over the haunches of others and bleating. They were not in their usual calm, pattering hurry, but nervous, excited, and continually facing west toward the canyon, noses up. On the top of the next little ridge Hare heard Silvermane snort as he did when led to drink. There was a scent of water on the wind. Hare caught it, a damp, muggy smell. The sheep had noticed it long before, and now, under its nearer, stronger influence, began to bleat wildly, to run faster, to crowd without aim. "There's work ahead. Keep them packed together and going. Turn the wheelers," ordered August. What had been a drive became a flight, and it was well so long as the sheep headed straight up the trail. Piute had to go to the right to avoid being run down. Mescal rode to fill up his place. Hare took his cue from Dave and rode along the flank, crowding the sheep inward. August cracked his whip behind. For half a mile the flock kept to the trail. Then, as if by common consent, they sheered off to the right. With this move, August and Dave were transformed from quiet almost to frenzy. They galloped to and fro into the very faces of the turning sheep and drove them back. Then the rear guard of the flock curved outward. "Drive 'em in!" roared August. Hare sent Silvermane at the deflecting sheep and frightened them into line. Wolf no longer had the power to chase the stragglers. They had to be turned by a horse. All along the flank noses pointed outward. Here and there sheep wilder than the others leaped forward to lead a winding wave of bobbing, woolly backs. Mescal engaged one point, Hare another, Dave another, and August Naab's roan thundered up and down the constantly broken line. All this while, as the shepherds fought back the sheep, the flight continued faster eastward, farther canyonward. Each side gained, but the flock gained more toward the canyon than the drivers gained toward the oasis. By August's hoarse yells, by David's stern face and ceaseless, swift action, by the increasing din, Hare knew terrible danger hung over the flock. What it was he could not tell. He heard the roar of the river rapids, and it seemed that the sheep heard it with him. They plunged madly. They had gone wild from the scent and sound of water. Their eyes gleamed red. Their tongues flew out. There was no aim to the rush of the great body of sheep. But they followed the leaders, and the leaders followed the scent. And the drivers headed them off, rode them down, ceaselessly, riding forward to check one outbreak, wheeling backward to check another. The flight became a rout. Hare was in the thick of dust and din, of the terror-stricken, jumping mob, of the ever-starting, ever-widening streams of sheep. He rode and yelled and fired his Colt. The dust choked him, the sun burned him, the flying pebbles cut his cheek. Once he had a glimpse of Black Bolly in a melee of dust and sheep. Dave's mustang blurred in his sight. August's roan seemed to be double. Then Silvermane, of his own accord, was out before them all. The sheep had almost gained the victory. Their keen noses were pointed toward the water. Nothing could stop their flight. But still the drivers dashed at them, ever fighting, never wearying, never ceasing. At last, the incline, where a gentle slope led to a darkening break in the desert, the rout became a stampede. Left and right flanks swung round. The line lengthened, and round the struggling horses, knee-deep in woolly backs, split the streams to flow together beyond in one resistless river of sheep. Mescal forced Bolly out of danger. Dave escaped the right flank. August and Hare swept on with the flood, till the horses, sighting the dark canyon, halted to stand like rocks. "Will they run over the rim?" yelled Hare, horrified. His voice came to him as a whisper. August Naab, sweat-stained in red dust, haggard, gray locks streaming in the wind, raised his arms above his head, hopeless. The long nodding line of woolly forms, lifting like the crest of a yellow wave, plunged out and down in rounded billow over the canyon rim. With a din of hoof and bleats the sheep spilled themselves over the precipice, and an awful deafening roar boomed up from the river, like the spreading thunderous crash of an avalanche. How endless seemed that fatal plunge! The last line of sheep, pressing close to those gone before, and yet impelled by the strange instinct of life, turned their eyes too late on the brink, carried over by their own momentum. The sliding roar ceased. Its echo, muffled and hollow, pealed from the cliffs, then rumbled down the canyon, to merge at length in the sullen, dull, continuous sound of the rapids. Hare turned at last from that narrow, iron-walled cleft, the depth of which he had not seen, and now he had no wish to see. His eyes fell upon a little Navajo lamb limping in the trail of the flock, headed for the canyon, as sure as its mother in purpose. He dismounted and seized it, to find, to his infinite wonder and gladness, that it wore a string and bell round its neck. It was Mescal's pet. End of chapter 9. Of the Heritage of the Desert by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Riding the Ranges, Part 1. The shepherds were home in the oasis that evening, and next day the tragedy of the sheep was a thing of the past. No other circumstance of Hare's 4 months with the Naabs had so affected him as this swift, inevitable sweeping away of the flock. Nothing else had so vividly told him the nature of this country of abrupt heights and depths. He remembered August Naab's magnificent gesture of despair, and now the man was cheerful again. He showed no signs of his great loss. His tasks were many, and when one was done he went on to the next. If Hare had not had many proofs of this Mormon's feelings, he would have thought him callous. August Naab trusted God and men, loved animals, did what he had to do with all his force, and accepted fate. The tragedy of the sheep had been only an incident in a tragical life that Hare divined with awe. Mescal sorrowed, and Wolf mourned in sympathy with her, for their occupation was gone. But both brightened when August made known his intention to cross the river to the Navajo range, to trade with the Indians for another flock. He began his preparations immediately. The snow freshets had long run out of the river, the water was low, and he wanted to fetch the sheep down before the summer rains. He also wanted to find out what kept his son Snap so long among the Navajos. "I'll take Billy and go at once. Dave, you join George and Zeke out on the Silver Cup range. Take Jack with you. Brand all the cattle you can before the snow flies. Get out of Dene's way if he rides over, and avoid Holderness's men. I'll have no fights, but keep your eyes sharp for their doings." It was a relief to Hare that Snap Naab had not yet returned to the oasis, for he felt a sense of freedom which otherwise would have been lacking. He spent the whole of a long, calm summer day in the orchard and the vineyard. The fruit season was at its height. Grapes, plums, pears, melons were ripe and luscious. Midsummer was vacationing time for the children, and they flocked into the trees like birds. The girls were picking grapes. Mother Ruth enlisted Jack in her service at the pear trees. Mescal came too, and caught the golden pears he threw down and smiled up at him. Wolf was there, and Noodle. Black Bolly pushed her black nose over the fence and whinnied for apples. The turkeys strutted, the peafowls preened their beautiful plumage, the guinea hens ran like quail. Save for those frowning red cliffs, Hare would have forgotten where he was. The warm sun, the yellow fruit, the merry screams of children, the joyous laughter of girls, were pleasant reminders of autumn picnic days long gone, but in the face of these dominating, wind-scarred walls he could not forget. That night Hare endeavored to see Mescal alone for a few moments, to see her once more with unguarded eyes, to whisper a few words, to say good bye, but it was impossible. On the morrow he rode out of the Red Cliff gate with Dave and the pack horse, a dull ache in his heart, for amid the cheering crowd of children and women who bade them good bye, he caught the wave of Mescal's hand and a look of her eye that would be with him always. What might happen before he returned, if he ever did return? For he knew now, as well as he could feel Silvermane's easy stride, that out there under the white glare of desert, the white gleam of the slopes of Coconina, was wild life awaiting him, and he shut his teeth and narrowed his eyes and faced it with an eager joy that was in strange contrast to the pang in his breast. That morning the wind dipped down off the Vermilion Cliffs and whipped west. There was no scent of river water, and Hare thought of the fatality of the sheep drive, when, for one day out of the year, a moistened, dank breeze had met the flock on the narrow bench. Soon the bench lay far behind them, and the strip of treacherous sand, and the maze of sculpted cliffs under the Blue Star, and the hummocky low ridges beyond with their dry white washes. Silvermane kept on in front. Already Hare had learned that the gray would have no horse before him. His pace was swift, steady, tireless. Dave was astride his Navajo mount, an Indian-bred horse, half mustang, which had to be held in with a firm rein. The pack train strung out far behind, trotting faithfully along with the white packs like the humps of camels, nodding up and down. Jack and Dave slackened their gait at the foot of the stony divide. It was an ascent of miles, so long that it did not appear steep. Here the pack train caught up, and thereafter hung at the heels of the riders. From the broad bare summit Jack saw the Silver Cup Valley range with eyes which seemed to magnify the winding trail, the long red wall, the green slopes, the dots of sage and cattle. Then he made allowance for months of unobstructed vision. He had learned to see. His eyes had adjusted themselves to distance and dimensions. Silver Cup Spring lay in a bright green spot close under a break in the rocky slope that soon lost its gray cliff in the shaggy cedared side of Coconina. The camp of the brothers was situated upon this cliff in a split between two sections of the wall. Well sheltered from the north and west winds was a grassy plot which afforded a good survey of the valley and the trails. Dave and Jack received glad greetings from Zeke and George, and Silvermane was an object of wonder and admiration. Zeke, who had often seen the gray and chased him too, walked round and round him, stroking the silver mane, feeling the great chest muscles, slapping his flanks. Well, well, Silvermane, to think I'd live to see you wearing a saddle and bridle. He's even bigger than I thought. There's a horse, Hare. Never will be another like him in this desert. If Dene ever sees that horse he'll chase him to the Great Salt Basin. Dene's crazy about fast horses. He's from Kentucky, somebody said, and he knows a horse when he sees one. How are things? Queried Dave. We can't complain much, replied Zeke, though we've wasted some time on old Whitefoot. He's been chasing our horses. It's pretty hot and dry. Most of the cattle are on the slopes, fair browse yet. There's a bunch of steers gone up on the mountain, and some more round toward the saddle or the canyon. Been over Seeping Springs way? Yes. No change since your trip. Holderness's cattle are ranging in the upper valley. George found tracks near the spring. We believe somebody was watching there and made off when we came up. We'll see Holderness's men when we get to riding out, put in George, and some of Dene's too. Zeke met Two Spot Chance and Culver below at the spring one day. Sort of surprised them." "What day was that?" "Let's see. This is Friday. It was last Monday." "What were they doing over here?" "Said they were tracking a horse that had broken his hobbles, but they seemed uneasy and soon rode off." "Did either of them ride a horse with one shoe shy?" "Now I think of it, yes. Zeke noticed the track at the spring." "Well, Chance and Culver had been out our way," declared Dave. "I saw their tracks, and they filled up the Blue Star water hole, and cost us 3,000 sheep." Then he related the story of the drive of the sheep, the finding of the plugged water hole, the scent of the Colorado, and the plunge of the sheep into the canyon. "We've saved one, Mescal's belled lamb," he concluded. Neither Zeke nor George had a word in reply. Hare thought their silence unnatural, neither did the mask like stillness of their faces change. But Hare saw in their eyes a pointed clear flame, vibrating like a compass needle, a mere glimmering spark. "I'd like to know," continued Dave, calmly poking the fire, "who hired Dene's men to plug the water hole? Dene couldn't do that. He loves a horse, and any man who loves a horse couldn't fill a water hole in this desert." Hare entered upon his new duties as a range rider with a zeal that almost made up for his lack of experience. He bade fair to develop into a right hand man for Dave, under whose watchful eye he worked. His natural qualifications were soon shown. He could ride, though his seat was awkward and clumsy compared to that of the desert rangers, a fault that Dave said would correct itself as time fitted him close to the saddle and to the swing of his horse. His sight had become extraordinarily keen for a newcomer on the ranges, and when experience had taught him the landmarks, the trails, the distances, the difference between smoke and dust and haze, when he could distinguish a band of mustangs from cattle and range riders from outlaws or Indians, in a word, when he had learned to know what it was that he saw, to trust his judgment, he would have acquired the basic feature of a rider's training. But he showed no gift for the lasso, that other essential requirement of his new calling. "It's funny," said Dave patiently. "You can't get the hang of it. Maybe it's born in a fellow. Now handling a gun seems to come natural for some fellows, and you're one of them. If only you could get the rope away as quick as you can throw your gun." Jack kept faithfully at it, unmindful of defeats, often chagrined when he missed some easy opportunity. Not improbably he might have failed altogether if he had been riding an ordinary horse, or if he had to try roping from a fiery mustang. But Silvermane was as intelligent as he was beautiful and fleet. The horse learned rapidly the agile turns and sudden stops necessary, and as for free running, he never got enough. Out on the range, Silvermane always had his head up and watched. His life had been spent in watching. He saw cattle, riders, mustangs, deer, coyotes, every moving thing, so that Hare, in the chasing of a cow, had but to start Silvermane, and then he could devote himself to the handling of his rope. It took him 10 times longer to lasso the cow than it took Silvermane to head the animal. Dave laughed at some of Jack's exploits, encouraged him often, praised his intent, if not his deed, and always after a run nodded at Silvermane in mute admiration. Branding the cows and yearlings and tame steers which watered at Silver Cup and never wandered far away was play according to Dave's version. "Wait till we get after the wild steers up on the mountain and in the canyons," he would say when Jack dropped like a log at supper. Work it certainly was for him. At night he was so tired that he could scarcely crawl into bed. His back felt as if it were broken, his legs were raw, and his bones ached. Many mornings he thought it impossible to arise, but always he crawled out, grim and haggard, and hobbled round the campfire to warm his sore and bruised muscles. Then when Zeke and George rode in with the horses, the day's work began. During these weeks of his hardening up, as Dave called it, Hare bore much pain, but he continued well and never missed a day. At the most trying time, when for a few days he had to be helped on and off Silvermane, for he insisted that he would not stay in camp, the brothers made his work as light as possible. They gave him the branding outfit to carry, a running iron, and a little pot with charcoal and bellows, and with these he followed the riders at a convenient distance and leisurely pace. Some days they branded 100 cattle. By October they had August Naab's crudely fashioned cross on thousands of cows and steers. Still the stock kept coming down from the mountain, driven to the valley by cold weather and snow-covered grass. It was well into November before the riders finished at Silver Cup, and then arose a question as to whether it would be advisable to go to Seeping Springs or to the canyons farther west along the slope of Coconina. George favored the former, but Dave overruled him. "Father's orders," he said. "He wants us to ride Seeping Springs last, because he'll be with us then, and Snap too. We're going to have trouble over there." "How's this branding stock going to help the matter any, I'd like to know?" inquired George. "We Mormons never needed it." "Father says we all have to come to it. Holderness's stock is branded. Perhaps he's marked a good many steers of ours. We can't tell. But if we have our own branded, we'll know what's ours. If he drives our stock, we'll know it. If Dene steals, it can be proved that he steals. Well, what then? Do you think he'll care for that, or Holderness either?" "No, only it makes this difference. Both things will then be barefaced robbery. We've never been able to prove anything, though we boys know. We don't need any proof. Father gives these men the benefit of a doubt. We've got to stand by him. I know, George, your hand's begun to itch for your gun. So does mine. But we've orders to obey." Many gullies and canyons headed up the slope of Coconina, west of Silver Cup, and ran down to open wide on the flat desert. They contained plots of white sage and bunches of rich grass and cold springs. The steers that ranged these ravines were wild as wolves, and in the tangled thickets of juniper and manzanita and jumbles of weathered cliff they were exceedingly difficult to catch. Well it was that Hare had received his initiation and had become inured to rough, insensate work, for now he came to know the real stuff of which these Mormons were made. No obstacle barred them. They penetrated the gullies to the last step. They rode weathered slopes that were difficult for deer to stick upon. They thrashed the bayonet-guarded manzanita copses. They climbed into labyrinthine fastnesses, penetrating to every nook where a steer could hide. Miles of sliding slope and marble-bottomed stream beds were ascended on foot, for cattle could climb where a horse could not. Climbing was arduous enough, yet the hardest and most perilous toil began when a wild steer was cornered. They roped the animals on moving slopes of weathered stone, and branded them on the edges of precipices. The days and weeks passed. How many, no one counted or cared. The circle of the sun daily lowered over the south end of Coconina, and the black snow clouds crept down the slopes. Frost whitened the ground at dawn and held half the day in the shade. Winter was close at the heels of the long autumn. As for Hare, true to August Naab's assertion, he had lost flesh and suffered, and though the process was heartbreaking in its severity, he hung on till he hardened into a leather-lunged, wire-muscled man, capable of keeping pace with his companions. His day began with the dawn, when he threw off the frost-coated tarpaulin. The icy water brought him a glow of exhilaration. He drank in the spiced cold air, and there was the spring of the deer hunter in his step as he went down the slope for his horse. He no longer feared that Silvermane would run away. The Gray's bell could always be heard near the camp in the mornings, and when Hare whistled, there came always the answering thump of hobbled feet. When Silvermane saw him striding through the cedars or across the grassy belt of the valley, he would neigh his gladness. Hare had come to love Silvermane, and talked to him and treated him as if he were human. When the mustangs were brought into camp the day's work began, the same work as that of yesterday, and yet with endless variety, with ever-changing situations that called for quick wits, steel arms, stout hearts, and unflagging energies. The darkening blue sky and the sun-tipped crags of Vermilion Cliffs were signals to start for camp. They ate like wolves, sat for a while around the campfire, a ragged, weary, silent group, and soon lay down, their dark faces in the shadow of the cedars. In the beginning of this toil-filled time, Hare had resolutely set himself to forget Mescal, and he had succeeded, at least for a time, when he was so sore and weary that he scarcely thought at all. But she came back to him, and there was seldom an hour that was not hers. The long months, which seemed years since he had seen her, the change in him wrought by labor and peril, the deepening friendship between him and Dave, even the love he bore Silvermane, these, instead of making dim the memory of the dark-eyed girl, only made him tenderer in his thought of her. Snow drove the riders from the canyon camp down the Silver Cup, where they found August Naab and Snap, who had ridden in the day before. "Now you couldn't guess how many cattle are back there in the canyons," said Dave to his father. "I haven't any idea," answered August dubiously. 5,000 head. "Dave!" His father's tone was incredulous. "Yes, you know, we haven't been back in there for years. The stock has multiplied rapidly, in spite of the lions and wolves. Not only that, but they're safe from the winter, and are not likely to be found by Dene or anybody else." "How do you make that out?" "The first cattle we drove in used to come back here to Silver Cup to winter. Then they stopped coming, and we almost forgot them. Well, they've got a trail round under the saddle, and they go down in winter in the canyon. In summer they head up those rocky gullies, but they can't get up on the mountain, so it isn't likely anyone will ever discover them. They are wild as deer and fatter than any stock on the ranges." "Good. That's the best news I've had in many days. Now, boys, we'll ride the mountain slope toward Seeping Springs, drive the cattle down, and finish up this branding. Somebody ought to go to White Sage. I'd like to know what's going on, what Holderness is up to, what Dene is doing, if there's any stock being driven to Lund." "I told you I'd go," said Snap Naab. "I don't want you to," replied his father. "I guess it can wait till spring. Then we'll all go in. I might have thought to bring you boys out some clothes and boots. You're pretty ragged. Jack there, especially, looks like a scarecrow. Has he worked as hard as he looks?" "Father, he never lost a day," replied Dave warmly. "And you know what riding is in these canyons." August Naab looked at Hare and laughed. "It'd be funny, wouldn't it, if Holderness tried to slap you now? I always knew you'd do, Jack, and now you're one of us, and you'll have a share with my sons in the cattle." But the generous promise failed to offset the feeling aroused by the presence of Snap Naab. With the first sight of Snap's sharp face and strange eyes, Hare became conscious of an inward heat, which he had felt before, but never as now, when there seemed to be an actual flame within his breast. Yet Snap seemed greatly changed. The red flush, the swollen lines no longer showed in his face. Evidently, in his absence on the Navajo desert, he had had no liquor. He was good-natured, lively, much inclined to joking, and he seemed to have entirely forgotten his animosity toward Hare. It was easy for Hare to see that the man's evil nature was in the ascendancy only when he was under the dominance of drink. But he could not forgive, he could not forget. Mescal's dark, beautiful eyes haunted him. Even now she might be married to this man. Perhaps that was why Snap appeared to be in such cheerful spirits. Suspense added its burdensome, insistent question, but he could not bring himself to ask August if the marriage had taken place. For a day he fought to resign himself to the inevitability of the Mormon custom, to forget Mescal, and then he gave up trying. This surrender he felt to be something crucial in his life, though he could not wholly understand it. It was the darkening of his spirit, the death of boyish gentleness, the concluding step from youth into a forced manhood. The desert regeneration had not stopped at turning weak lungs, vitiated blood, and flaccid muscles into a powerful man. It was at work on his mind, his heart, his soul. They answered more and more to the call of some outside, ever-present, fiercely subtle thing. Thenceforth he no longer vexed himself in trying to forget Mescal. If she came to mind, he told himself the truth, that the weeks and months had only added to his love. And though it was bittersweet, there was relief in speaking the truth to himself. He no longer blinded himself by hoping, striving to have generous feelings toward Snap Naab. He called the inward fire by its real name, jealousy, and knew that in the end it would become hatred. End of chapter 10, part 1. Of the Heritage of the Desert by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Riding the Ranges, Part 2. On the third morning after leaving Silver Cup, the riders were working slowly along the slope of Coconina, and Hare, having driven down a bunch of cattle, found himself on an open ridge near the temporary camp. Happening to glance up the valley, he saw what appeared to be smoke hanging over Seeping Springs. "That can't be dust," he soliloquized. "Looks blue to me." He studied the hazy bluish cloud for some time, but it was so many miles away that he could not be certain whether it was smoke or not. So he decided to ride over and make sure. None of the Naabs was in camp, and there was no telling when they would return, so he set off alone. He expected to get back before dark, but it was of little consequence whether he did or not, for he had his blanket under the saddle and grain for Silvermane and food for himself in the saddlebags. Long before Silvermane's easy trot had covered half the distance, Hare recognized the cloud that had made him curious. It was smoke. He thought that range riders were camping at the springs, and he meant to see what they were about. After 3 hours of brisk travel, he reached the top of a low, rolling knoll that hid Seeping Springs. He remembered the springs were under the red wall, and that the pool where the cattle drank was lower down in a clump of cedars. He saw smoke rising in a column from the cedars, and he heard the lowing of cattle. "Something's wrong here," he muttered. Following the trail, he rode through the cedars to come upon the dry hole where the pool had once been. There was no water in the flume. The bellowing cattle came from beyond the cedars, down the other side of the ridge. He was not long in reaching the open, and then one glance made all clear. A new pool, large as a little lake, shone in the sunlight, and round it a jostling horned mass of cattle were pressing against a high corral. The flume that fed water to the pool was fenced all the way up to the springs. Jack rode slowly down the ridge, with eyes roving under the cedars and up to the wall. Not a man was in sight. When he got to the fire, he saw that it was not many hours old, and was surrounded by fresh boot and horse tracks in the dust. Piles of slender pine logs, trimmed flat on one side, were proof of somebody's intention to erect a cabin. In rage, he flung himself from the saddle. It was not many moments' work for him to push a part of the fire under the fence, and part of it against the pile of logs. The pitch pines went off like rockets, driving the thirsty cattle back. "I'm going to trail those horse tracks," said Hare. He tore down a portion of the fence enclosing the flume and gave Silvermane a drink, then put him to a fast trot on the white trail. The tracks he had resolved to follow were clean cut. A few inches of snow had fallen in the valley, and melting had softened the hard ground. Silvermane kept to his gait with the tirelessness of a desert horse. August Naab had once said 50 miles a day would be play for the stallion. All the afternoon Hare watched the trail speed toward him and the end of Coconina rise above him. Long before sunset he had reached the slope of the mountain and had begun the ascent. Halfway up he came to the snow and counted the tracks of 3 horses. At twilight he rode into the glade where August Naab had waited for his Navajo friends. There, in a sheltered nook among the rocks, he unsaddled Silvermane, covered and fed him, built a fire, ate sparingly of his meat and bread, and rolling up in his blanket, was soon asleep. He was up and off before sunrise, and he came out on the western slope of Coconina just as the shadowy valley awakened from its misty sleep in the daylight. Soon the pink cliffs leaned out, glimmering and vast, to change from gloomy gray to rosy glow, and then to brighten and to redden in the morning sun. The snow thinned and failed, but the iron-cut horse tracks showed plainly in the trail. At the foot of the mountain the tracks left the white sage trail and led off to the north toward the cliffs. Hare searched the red sage spotted waste for Holderness's ranch. He located it, a black patch on the rising edge of the valley, under the wall, and turned Silvermane into the tracks that pointed straight toward it. The sun cleared Coconina and shone warm on his back. The pink cliffs lifted higher and higher before him. From the ridge tops he saw the black patch grow into cabins and corrals. As he neared the ranch he came into rolling pasture land, where the bleached grass shone white and the cattle were ranging in the thousands. This range had once belonged to Martin Cole, and Hare thought of the bitter Mormon as he noted the snug cabins for the riders, the rambling, picturesque ranch house, the large corrals, and the long flume that ran down from the cliff. There was a corral full of shaggy horses and another full of steers, and 2 lines of cattle, one going into a pond corral and one coming out. The air was gray with dust. A bunch of yearlings were licking at huge lumps of brown rock salt. A wagon full of cowhides stood before the ranch house. Hare reined in at the door and helloed. A red-faced ranger with sandy hair and twinkling eyes appeared. "Hello, stranger. Get down and come in," he said. "Is Holderness here?" asked Hare. "No, he's been to Lund with a bunch of steers. I reckon he'll be in White Sage by now. I'm Snood, the foreman. Is it a job riding you want?" "No." "Say, that horse!" he exclaimed. His gaze of friendly curiosity had moved from Hare to Silvermane. "You can corral me if that ain't the Silver Range stallion." "Yes," said Hare. Snood's whoop brought 3 riders to the door, and when he pointed to the horse they stepped out with good-natured grins and admiring eyes. "I've never seen him but once," said one. "Lordy, what a horse!" Snood walked round Silvermane. "If I owned this ranch I'd trade it for that stallion. I know Silvermane. He and I had some chases over in Nevada. And stranger, who might you be?" "I'm one of August Naab's riders." "Dene's spy?" Snood looked Hare over carefully, with much interest, and without any show of ill will. "I've heard of you. And what might one of Naab's riders want of Holderness?" "I rode into Seeping Springs yesterday," said Hare, eyeing the foreman. "There was a new pond fenced in. Our cattle couldn't drink. There were a lot of trimmed logs. Somebody was going to build a cabin. I burned the corrals and logs, and I trailed fresh tracks from Seeping Springs to this ranch." "The hell you did!" shouted Snood, and his face flamed. "See here, stranger, you're the second man to accuse some of my riders of such dirty tricks. That's enough for me. I was foreman of this ranch till this minute. I was foreman, but there was things going on that I didn't know of. I kicked on that deal with Martin Cole. I quit. I steal no man's water. Is that good with you?" Snood's query was as much a challenge as a question. He bit savagely at his pipe. Hare offered his hand. "Your word goes. Dave Naab said you might be Holderness's foreman, but that you weren't a liar or a thief. I'd believe it even if Dave hadn't told me." "Them fellows you tracked rode in here yesterday. They've gone now. I've no more to say, except I never hired them." "I'm glad to hear it. Good day, Snood. I'm in something of a hurry." With that Hare faced about in the direction of White Sage. Once clear of the corrals, he saw the village closer than he had expected to find it. He walked Silvermane most of the way and jogged along the rest, so that he reached the village in the twilight. Memory served him well. He rode in as August Naab had ridden out, and arrived at the bishop's barnyard, where he put up his horse. Then he went to the house. It was necessary to introduce himself, for none of the bishop's family recognized in him the young man they had once befriended. The old bishop prayed and reminded him of the laying on of hands. The women served him with food. The young men brought him new boots and garments to replace those that had been worn to tatters. Then they plied him with questions about the Naabs, whom they had not seen for nearly a year. They rejoiced at his recovered health. They welcomed him with warm words. Later, Hare sought an interview alone with the bishop's sons, and he told them of the loss of the sheep, of the burning of the new corrals, of the tracks leading to Holderness's ranch. In turn, they warned him of his danger and gave him information desired by August Naab. Holderness's grasp on the outlying ranges and water rights had slowly and surely tightened. Every month he acquired new territory. He drove cattle regularly to Lund, and it was no secret that much of the stock came from the eastern slope of Coconina. He could not hire enough riders to do his work. The suspicion that he was not a cattleman but a rustler had slowly gained ground. It was scarcely hinted, but it was believed. His friendship with Dene had become offensive to the Mormons, who had formerly been on good footing with him. Dene's killing of Martin Cole was believed to have been at Holderness's instigation. Cole had threatened Holderness. Then Dene and Cole had met in the main street of White Sage. Cole's death ushered in the bloody time that he had prophesied. Dene's band had grown. No man could say how many men he had or who they were. Chance and Culver were openly his lieutenants, and whenever they came into the village there was shooting. There were ugly rumors afloat in regard to their treatment of Mormon women. The wives and daughters of once peaceful White Sage dared no longer venture out of doors after nightfall. There was more money in coin and more whiskey than ever before in the village. Lund and the few villages northward were terrorized as well as White Sage. It was a bitter story. The bishop and his sons tried to persuade Hare next morning to leave the village without seeing Holderness, urging the futility of such a meeting. "I will see him," said Hare. He spent the morning at the cottage, and when it came time to take his leave, he smiled into the anxious faces. "If I weren't able to take care of myself, August Naab would never have said so." Had Hare asked himself what he intended to do when he faced Holderness, he could not have told. His feelings were pent in, bound, but at the bottom something rankled. His mind seemed steeped in still thunderous atmosphere. How well he remembered the quaint wide street, the gray church. As he rode, many persons stopped to gaze at Silvermane. He turned the corner into the main thoroughfare. A new building had been added to the several stores. Mustangs stood, bridles down, before the doors. Men lounged along the railings. As he dismounted, he heard the loungers speak of his horse, and he saw their leisurely manner quicken. He stepped into the store to meet more men, among them August Naab's friend Abe. Hare might never have been in White Sage for all the recognition he found, but he excited something keener than curiosity. He asked for spurs, a clasp knife, and some other necessaries, and he contrived, when momentarily out of sight behind a pile of boxes, to whisper his identity to Abe. The Mormon was dumbfounded. When he came out of his trance, he showed his gladness, and at a question of Hare's, he silently pointed toward the saloon. Hare faced the open door. The room had been enlarged. It was now on a level with the store floor, and was blue with smoke, foul with the fumes of rum, and noisy with the voices of dark, rugged men. A man in the middle of the room was dancing a jig. "Hello, who's this?" he said, straightening up. It might have been the stopping of the dance or the quick spark in Hare's eyes that suddenly quieted the room. Hare had once vowed to himself that he would never forget the scarred face. It belonged to the outlaw Chance. The sight of it flashed into the gulf of Hare's mind like a meteor into black night. A sudden madness raced through his veins. "Hello, don't you know me?" he said, with a long step that brought him close to Chance. The outlaw stood irresolute. Was this an old friend or an enemy? His beady eyes scintillated and twitched as if they sought to look him over, yet dared not, because it was only in the face that intention could be read. The stillness of the room broke to a hoarse whisper from someone. "Look how he packs his gun." Another man, answering, whispered, "There's not 6 men in Utah who pack a gun that way." Chance heard these whispers, for his eyes shifted downward the merest fraction of a second. The brick color of his face turned a dirty white. "Do you know me?" demanded Hare. Chance's answer was a spasmodic jerking of his hand toward his hip. Hare's arm moved quicker, and Chance's Colt went spinning to the floor. "Too slow," said Hare. Then he flung Chance backward and struck him blows that sent his head with sodden thuds against the log wall. Chance sank to the floor in a heap. Hare kicked the outlaw's gun out of the way and wheeled to the crowd. Holderness stood foremost, his tall form leaning against the bar, his clear eyes shining like light on ice. "Do you know me?" asked Hare curtly. Holderness started slightly. "I certainly don't," he replied. "You slapped my face once." Hare leaned close to the rancher. "Slap it now, you rustler." In the slow guarded instant when Hare's gaze held Holderness's and the other men, a low murmuring ran through the room. "Dene's spy!" suddenly burst out Holderness. Hare slapped his face. Then he backed a few paces with his right arm held before him almost as high as his shoulder, the wrist rigid, the fingers quivering. "Don't try to draw, Holderness. That's August Naab's trick with a gun," whispered a man hurriedly. "Holderness, I made a bonfire over at Seeping Springs," said Hare. "I burned the new corrals your men built, and I tracked them to your ranch. Snood threw up his job when he heard it. He's an honest man, and no honest man will work for a water thief, a cattle rustler, a sheep killer. You're showing up, Holderness. Leave the country before someone kills you. Understand? Before someone kills you." Holderness stood motionless against the bar, his eyes fierce with passionate hate. Hare backed step by step to the outside door, his right hand still high, his look holding the crowd bound to the last instant. Then he slipped out, scattered the group round Silvermane, and struck hard with the spurs. The gray, never before spurred, broke down the road into his old wild speed. Men were crossing from the corner of the green square. One, a compact little fellow, swarthy, his dark hair long and flowing, with jaunty and alert air, was Dene, the outlaw leader. He stopped with his companions to let the horse cross. Hare guided the thundering stallion slightly to the left. Silvermane swerved and in two mighty leaps bore down on the outlaw. Dene saved himself by quickly leaping aside, but even as he moved, Silvermane struck him with his left foreleg, sending him into the dust. At the street corner Hare glanced back. Yelling men were rushing from the saloon, and some of them fired after him. The bullets whistled harmlessly behind Hare. Then the corner house shut off his view. Silvermane lengthened out and stretched lower, with his white mane flying and his nose pointed level for the desert. End of chapter 10, part 2. Of the Heritage of the Desert by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Desert Hawk. Toward the close of the next day, Jack Hare arrived at Seeping Springs. A pile of gray ashes marked the spot where the trimmed logs had lain. Round the pool ran a black circle hard packed into the ground by many hoofs. Even the board flume had been burned to a level with the glancing sheet of water. Hare was slipping Silvermane's bit to let him drink when he heard a halloo. Dave Naab galloped out of the cedars, and presently August Naab and his other sons appeared with a pack train. "Now you've played Bob!" exclaimed Dave. He swung out of his saddle and gripped Hare with both hands. "I know what you've done. I know where you've been. Father will be furious, but don't you care." The other Naabs trotted down the slope and lined their horses before the pool. The sons stared in blank astonishment. The father surveyed the scene slowly, and then fixed wrathful eyes on Hare. "What does this mean?" he demanded, with the sonorous roll of his angry voice. Hare told all that had happened. August Naab's gloomy face worked, and his eagle gaze had in it a strange, far-seeing light. His mind was dwelling upon his mystic power of revelation. I see," he said haltingly. "Ki-yi!" yelled Dave Naab with all the power of his lungs. His head was back, his mouth wide open, his face red, his neck corded and swollen with the intensity of his passion. "Be still, boy," ordered his father. "Hare, this was madness. But tell me what you learned." Briefly Hare repeated all that he had been told at the Bishop's, and concluded with the killing of Martin Cole by Dene. August Naab bowed his head, and his giant frame shook under the force of his emotion. Martin Cole was the last of his lifelong friends. This outlaw, you say you ran him down?" asked Naab, raising haggard and shaking out of his grief. "Yes. He didn't recognize me or know what was coming till Silvermane was on him, but he was quick and fell sideways. Silvermane's knee sent him sprawling." "What will it all lead to?" asked August Naab, and in his extremity he appealed to his eldest son. "The bars are down," said Snap Naab with a click of his long teeth. "Father," began Dave Naab earnestly, "Jack has done a splendid thing. The news will fly over Utah like wildfire. Mormons are slow. They need a leader, but they can follow and they will. We can't cure these evils by hoping and praying. We've got to fight." "Dave's right, Dad. It means fight," cried George, with his fists clenched high. "You've been wrong, father, in holding back," said Zeke Naab, his lean jaw bulging. "This Holderness will steal the water and meat out of our children's mouths. We've got to fight." "Let's ride to White Sage," put in Snap Naab, and the little flecks in his eyes were dancing. "I'll throw a gun on Dene. I can get to him. We've been tolerable friends. He wanted me to join his band. I'll kill him." He laughed as he raised his right hand and swept it down to his left side. The blue Colt lay on his outstretched palm. Dene's life and Holderness's, too, hung in the balance between two deadly snaps of this desert wolf's teeth. He was one of the Naabs, and yet apart from them, for neither religion nor friendship nor life itself mattered to him. August Naab's huge bulk shook again, not this time with grief, but in wrestling effort to withstand the fiery influence of this unholy fighting spirit among his sons. "I am forbidden." His answer was gentle, but its very gentleness breathed of his battle over himself, of allegiance to something beyond earthly duty. "We'll drive the cattle to Silver Cup," he decided, "and then go home. I give up Seeping Springs. Perhaps this valley and water will content Holderness." When they reached the oasis, Hare was surprised to find that it was the day before Christmas. The welcome given the long absent riders was like a celebration. Much to Hare's disappointment, Mescal did not appear. The homecoming was not joyful to him because it lacked her welcoming smile. Christmas Day ushered in the short desert winter. Ice formed in the ditches and snow fell, but neither long resisted the reflection of the sun from the walls. The early morning hours were devoted to religious services. At midday dinner was served in the big room of August Naab's cabin. At one end was a stone fireplace where logs blazed and crackled. In all his days Hare had never seen such a bountiful board, yet he was unable to appreciate it, to share in the general thanksgiving. Dominating all other feeling was the fear that Mescal would come in and take a seat by Snap Naab's side. When Snap seated himself opposite with his pale little wife, Hare found himself waiting for Mescal with an intensity that made him dead to all else. The girls, Judith, Esther, Rebecca, came running gaily in, clad in their best dresses, with bright ribbons to honor the occasion. Rebecca took a seat beside Snap, and Hare gulped with a hard contraction of his throat. Mescal was not yet a Mormon's wife. He seemed to be lifted upward, to grow light-headed with the blessed assurance. Then Mescal entered and took the seat next to him. She smiled and spoke, and the blood beat thick in his ears. That moment was happy, but it was as nothing to its successor. Under the table cover, Mescal's hand found his, and pressed it daringly and gladly. Her hand lingered in his all the time August Naab spent in carving the turkey, lingered there even though Snap Naab's hawk eyes were never far away. In the warm touch of her hand, in some subtle thing that radiated from her, Hare felt a change in the girl he loved. A few months had wrought in her some indefinable difference, even as they had increased his love to its full volume and depth. Had his absence brought her to the realization of her woman's heart. In the afternoon, Hare left the house and spent a little while with Silvermane. Then he wandered along the wall to the head of the oasis, and found a seat on the fence. The next few weeks presented to him a situation that would be difficult to endure. He would be near Mescal, but only to have the truth forced cruelly home to him every sane moment, that she was not for him. Out on the ranges he had abandoned himself to dreams of her. They had been beautiful. They had made the long hours seem like minutes, but they had forged chains that could not be broken, and now he was hopelessly fettered. The clatter of hoofs roused him from a reverie which was half sad, half sweet. Mescal came tearing down the level on Black Bolly. She pulled in the mustang and halted beside Hare to hold out shyly a red scarf embroidered with Navajo symbols in white and red beads. "I wanted a chance to give you this," she said. "A little Christmas present." For a few seconds Hare could find no words. "Did you make it for me, Mescal?" he finally asked. "How good of you! I'll keep it always." "Put it on now. Let me tie it. There." "But, child, suppose they saw it?" "I don't care who sees it." She met him with clear, level eyes. Her curt, crisp speech was full of meaning. He looked long at her with a yearning denied for many a day. Her face was the same, yet wonderfully changed, the same in line and color, but different in soul and spirit. The old somber shadow lay deep in the eyes, but it too had been added gleam of will and reflection of thought. The whole face had been refined and transformed. "Mescal, what's happened? You're not the same. You seem almost happy. Has he given you up?" "Don't you know Mormons better than that? The thing is the same, so far as they're concerned." "But, Mescal, are you going to marry him? For God's sake tell me." "Never." It was a woman's word, instant, inflexible, desperate. With a deep breath Hare realized where the girl had changed. "Still you're promised, pledged to him. How will you get out of it?" "I don't know how, but I'll cut out my tongue and be dumb as my poor peon before I'll speak the word that'll make me Snap Naab's wife." There was a long silence. Mescal smoothed out Bolly's mane, and Hare gazed up at the walls with eyes that did not see them. Presently he spoke. "I'm afraid for you. Snap watched us today at dinner." "He's jealous." "Suppose he sees this scarf?" Mescal laughed defiantly. It was bewildering for Hare to hear her. Mescal, I may yet come to this." Hare's laugh echoed Mescal's as he pointed to the enclosure under the wall, where the graves showed bare and rough. Her warm color fled, but it flooded back, rich, mantling brow and cheek and neck. "Snap Naab will never kill you," she said impulsively. "Mescal!" She swiftly turned her face away as his hand closed on hers. "Mescal, do you love me?" The trembling of her fingers and the heaving of her bosom lent his hope conviction. "Mescal," he went on, "these past months have been years, years of toiling, thinking, changing, but always loving. I'm not the man you knew. I'm wild. I'm starved for a sight of you. I love you, Mescal, my dearest flower." She raised her free hand to his shoulder and swayed toward him. He held her a moment, clasped tight, and then released her. "I'm quite mad!" he exclaimed, in a passion of self-reproach. "What a risk I'm putting on you! But I couldn't help it. Look at me just once, please, Mescal. Just one look. Now go." The drama of the succeeding days was of absorbing interest. Hare had liberty. There was little work for him to do save to care for Silvermane. He tried to hunt foxes in the caves and clefts. He rode up and down the broad space under the walls. He sought the open desert, only to be driven in by the bitter, biting winds. Then he would return to the big living room of the Naabs and sit before the burning logs. This spacious room was warm, light, pleasant, and was used by everyone in leisure hours. Mescal spent most of her time there. She was engaged upon a new frock of buckskin, and over this she bent with her needle and beads. When there was a chance, Hare talked with her, speaking one language with his tongue, a far different one with his eyes. When she was not present, he looked into the glowing red fire and dreamed of her. In the evenings, when Snap came in to his wooing and drew Mescal into a corner, Hare watched with covert glance and smoldering jealousy. Somehow he had come to see all things and all people in the desert glass, and his symbol for Snap Naab was the desert hawk. Snap's eyes were as wild and piercing as those of a hawk. His nose and mouth were as the beak of a hawk. His hands resembled the claws of a hawk, and the spurs he wore, always bloody, were still more significant of his ruthless nature. Then Snap's courting of the girl, the cool assurance, the unhastening ease, were like the slow rise, the sail, and the poise of a desert hawk before the downward, lightning swift swoop on his quarry. It was intolerable for Hare to sit there in the evenings, to try to play with the children who loved him, to talk to August Naab when his eyes seemed ever drawn to the quiet couple in the corner, and his ear was unconsciously strained to catch a passing word. That hour was a miserable one for him, yet he could not bring himself to leave the room. He never saw Snap touch her. He never heard Mescal's voice. He believed that she spoke very little. When the hour was over and Mescal rose to pass to her room, then his doubt, his fear, his misery were as though they had never been. For as Mescal said good night, she would give him one look, swift as a flash, and in it were womanliness and purity and something beyond his comprehension. Her Indian serenity and mysticism veiled yet suggested some secret, some power by which she might yet escape the iron band of this Mormon rule. Hare could not fathom it. In that good night glance was a meaning for him alone, if meaning ever shone in a woman's eyes, and it said, "I will be true to you and to myself." Once the idea struck him that as soon as spring returned, it would be an easy matter, and probably wise, for him to leave the oasis and go up into Utah, far from the desert canyon country. But the thought refused to stay before his consciousness a moment. New life had flushed his veins here. He loved the dreamy, sleepy oasis, with its mellow sunshine always at rest on the glistening walls. He loved the cedar-scented plateau, where hope had dawned, and the wind-swept sand strips, where hard out-of-door life and work had renewed his wasting youth. He loved the canyon winding away toward Coconina, opening into wide abyss, and always, more than all, he loved the painted desert, with its ever-changing pictures, printed in sweeping dust and bare peaks and purple haze. He loved the beauty of these places, and the wildness in them had an affinity with something strange and untamed in him. He would never leave them. When his blood had cooled, when this tumultuous thrill and swell had worn themselves out, happiness would come again. Early in the winter, Snap Naab had forced his wife to visit his father's house with him, and she remained in the room, white-faced, passionately jealous, while he wooed Mescal. Then had come a scene. Hare had not been present, but he knew its results. Snap had been furious, his father grave, Mescal tearful and ashamed. The wife found many ways to interrupt her husband's lovemaking. She sent the children for him. She was taken suddenly ill. She discovered that the corral gate was open, and his cream-colored pinto, dearest to his heart, was running loose. She even set her cottage on fire. One Sunday evening, just before twilight, Hare was sitting on the porch with August Naab and Dave, when their talk was interrupted by Snap's loud calling for his wife. At first the sounds came from inside his cabin. Then he put his head out of a window and yelled. Plainly he was both impatient and angry. It was nearly time for him to make a Sunday call upon Mescal. "Something's wrong," muttered Dave. "Hester! Hester!" yelled Snap. Mother Ruth came out and said that Hester was not there. "Where is she?" Snap banged on the window sill with his fists. "Find her, somebody! Hester!" "Son, this is the Sabbath," called Father Naab, gravely. "Lower your voice. Now, what's the matter?" "Matter?" bawled Snap, giving way to rage. "When I was asleep Hester stole all my clothes. She's hid them. She's run off. There's not a damn thing for me to put on. I'll..." The roar of laughter from August and Dave drowned the rest of the speech. Hare managed to stifle his own mirth. Snap pulled in his head and slammed the window shut. "Jack," said August, "even among Mormons the course of true love never runs smooth." Hare finally forgot his bitter humor in pity for the wife. Snap came to care not at all for her messages and tricks, and he let nothing interfere with his evening beside Mescal. It was plain that he had gone far on the road of love. Whatever he had been in the beginning of the betrothal, he was now a lover, eager, importunate. His hawk's eyes were softer than Hare had ever seen them. He was obliging, kind, gay, an altogether different Snap Naab. He groomed himself often, and wore clean scarfs, and left off his bloody spurs. For 8 months he had not touched the bottle. When spring approached he was madly in love with Mescal, and the marriage was delayed because his wife would not have another woman in her home. Once Hare heard Snap remonstrating with his father. "If she doesn't come to time soon, I'll keep the kids and send her back to her father." "Don't be hasty, son. Let her have time," replied August. "Women must be humored. I'll wager she'll give in before the cottonwood blows, and that's not long." It was Hare's habit, as the days grew warmer, to walk a good deal, and one evening, as twilight shadowed the oasis and grew black under the towering walls, he strolled out toward the fields. While passing Snap's cottage, Hare heard a woman's voice in passionate protest and a man's in strident anger. Later, as he stood with his arm on Silvermane, a woman's scream, at first high pitched, then suddenly faint and smothered, caused him to grow rigid, and his hand clenched tightly. When he went back by the cottage, a low moaning confirmed his suspicion. That evening Snap appeared unusually bright and happy, and he asked his father to name the day for the wedding. August did so in a loud voice, and with evident relief. Then the quaint Mormon congratulations were offered to Mescal. To Hare, watching the strange girl with the distressingly keen intuition of an unfortunate lover, she appeared as pleased as any of them that the marriage was settled. But there was no shyness, no blushing confusion. When Snap bent to kiss her, his first kiss, she slightly turned her face so that his lips brushed her cheek, and yet even then her self-command did not break for an instant. It was a task for Hare to pretend to congratulate her; nevertheless he mumbled something. She lifted her long lashes, and there, deep beneath the shadows, was unutterable anguish. It gave him a shock. He went to his room, convinced that she had yielded, and though he could not blame her, and he knew she was helpless, he cried out in reproach and resentment. She had failed him, as he had known she must fail. He tossed on his bed and thought. He lay quiet, wide open eyes staring into the darkness, and his mind burned and seethed. Through the hours of that long night he learned what love had cost him. With the morning light came some degree of resignation. Several days went slowly by, bringing the 1st of April, which was to be the wedding day. August Naab had said it would come before the cottonwoods shed their white floss, and their buds had just commenced to open. The day was not a holiday, and George and Zeke and Dave began to pack for the ranges. Yet there was an air of jollity and festivity. Snap Naab had a springy step and jaunty mien. Once he regarded Hare with a slow smile. Piute prepared to drive his new flock up on the plateau. The women of the household were busy and excited; the children romped. The afternoon waned into twilight, and Hare sought the quiet shadows under the wall near the river trail. He meant to stay there until August Naab had pronounced his son and Mescal man and wife. The dull roar of the rapids, borne on a faint puff of westerly breeze, was lulled into a soothing murmur. A radiant white star peeped over the black rim of the wall. The solitude and silence were speaking to Hare's heart, easing his pain, when a soft patter of moccasined feet brought him bolt upright. A slender form rounded the corner wall. It was Mescal. The white dog Wolf hung close by her side. Swiftly she reached Hare. "Mescal!" he exclaimed. "Hush! Speak softly," she whispered fearfully. Her hands were clinging to his. "Jack, do you still love me?" More than woman's sweetness was in the whisper. The portent of indefinable motive made Hare tremble like a shaking leaf. "Good heavens! You are to be married in a few minutes. What do you mean? Where are you going? This buckskin suit, and Wolf with you? Mescal!" "There's no time. Only a word. Hurry! Do you still love me?" she panted, with great shining eyes close to his. "Love you? With all my soul." "Listen," she whispered, and leaned against him. A fresh breeze bore the boom of the river. She caught her breath quickly. "I love you. I love you. Good bye." She kissed him and broke from his clasp. Then silently, like a shadow, with the white dog close beside her, she disappeared in the darkness of the river trail. She was gone before he came out of his bewilderment. He rushed down the trail. He called her name. The gloom had swallowed her, and only the echo of his voice made answer. End of chapter 11. Of the Heritage of the Desert by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Echo Cliffs. When thought came clearly to him, he halted irresolute. For Mescal's sake, he must not appear to have any part in her headlong flight, or any knowledge of it. With stealthy footsteps he reached the cottonwoods, stole under the gloomy shade, and felt his way to a point beyond the twinkling lights. Then, peering through the gloom until assured he was safe from observation, and taking the dark side of the house, he gained the hall and his room. He threw himself on his bed and endeavored to compose himself, to quiet his vibrating nerves, to still the triumphant bell beat of his heart. For a while all his being swung to the palpitating consciousness of joy. Mescal had taken her freedom. She had escaped the swoop of the hawk. While Hare lay there trying to gather his shattered senses, the merry sound of voices and the music of an accordion hummed from the big living room next to his. Presently heavy boots thumped on the floor of the hall, and then a hand rapped on his door. "Jack, are you there?" called August Naab. "Yes." "Come along, then." Hare rose, opened the door, and followed August. The room was bright with lights, the table was set, and the Naabs, large and small, were standing expectantly. As Hare found a place behind them, Snap Naab entered with his wife. She was as pale as if she were in her shroud. Hare caught Mother Ruth's pitying, subdued glance as she drew the frail woman to her side. When August Naab began fingering his Bible, the whispering ceased. "Why don't they fetch her?" he questioned. "Judith, Esther, bring her in," said Mother Mary, calling into the hallway. Quick footsteps, and the girls burst in impetuously, exclaiming, "Mescal's not there." "Where is she, then?" demanded August Naab, going to the door. "Mescal!" he called. Succeeding his authoritative summons Only the cheery sputter of the wood fire broke the silence. "She hadn't put on her white frock," went on Judith. "Her buckskins aren't hanging where they always are," continued Esther. August Naab laid his Bible on the table. "I always feared it," he said simply. "She's gone!" cried Snap Naab. He ran into the hall, into Mescal's room, and returned trailing the white wedding dress. "The time we thought she spent to put this on, she's been..." He choked over the words and sank into a chair, face convulsed, hands shaking, weak in the grip of a grief that he had never known before. Suddenly he flung the dress into the fire. His wife fell to the floor in a dead faint. Then the desert hawk showed his claws. His hands tore at the close scarf round his throat as if to liberate a fury that was stifling him. His face lost all semblance to anything human. He began to howl, to rave, to curse, and his father circled him with iron arm and dragged him from the room. The children were whimpering, the wives lamenting. The quiet men searched the house and yard and corrals and fields, but they found no sign of Mescal. After long hours the excitement subsided, and all sought their beds. Morning disclosed the facts of Mescal's flight. She had dressed for the trail. A knapsack was missing, and food enough to fill it. Wolf was gone. Noodle was not in his corral. The peon slave had not slept in his sack. And there were moccasin tracks and burro tracks and dog tracks in the sand at the river crossing, and one of the boats was gone. This boat was not moored to the opposite shore. Questions arose. Had the boat sunk? Had the fugitives crossed safely, or had they drifted into the canyon? Dave Naab rode out along the river and saw the boat a mile below the rapids, bottom side up, and lodged on a sandbar. "She got across and then set the boat loose," said August. "That's the Indian of her. If she went up on the cliffs to the Navajos, maybe we'll find her. If she went into the Painted Desert..." A grave shake of his shaggy head completed his sentence. Morning also disclosed Snap Naab once more in the clutch of his demon, drunk and unconscious, lying like a log on the porch of his cottage. "This means ruin to him," said his father. "He had one chance. He was mad over Mescal, and if he had got her he might have conquered his thirst for rum." He gave orders for the sheep to be driven up on the plateau, and for his sons to ride out to the cattle ranges. He bade Hare pack and get in readiness to accompany him to the Navajo cliffs, there to search for Mescal. The river was low, as the spring thaws had not yet set in, and the crossing promised none of the hazard so menacing at a later period. Billy Naab rode across with the saddle and packs. Then August had to crowd the lazy burros into the water. Silvermane went in with a rush, and Charger took to the river like an old duck. August and Jack sat in the stern of the boat while Billy handled the oars. They crossed swiftly and safely. The 3 burros were then loaded, 2 with packs, the other with a heavy water bag. "See there," said August, pointing to tracks in the sand. The imprints of little moccasins reassured Hare, for he had feared the possibility suggested by the upturned boat. "Perhaps it'll be better if I never find her," continued Naab. "If I bring her back, Snap's as likely to kill her as to marry her. But I must try to find her. Only what to do with her..." "Give her to me," interrupted Jack. "Hare." "I love her." Naab's stern face relaxed. "Well, I'm beat. Though I don't see why you should be different from all the others. It was that time you spent with her on the plateau. I thought you too sick to think of a woman." "Mescal cares for me," said Hare. "Ah, that accounts. Hare, did you play fair with me?" "We tried to, though we couldn't help loving." "She would have married Snap but for you." "Yes, but I couldn't help that. You brought me out here and saved my life. I know what I owe you. Mescal meant to marry your son when I left for the range last fall. But she's a true woman and couldn't. August Naab, if we ever find her, will you marry her to him now?" "That depends. Did you know she intended to run?" "I never dreamed of it. I learned it only at the last moment. I met her on the river trail." "You should have stopped her." Hare maintained silence. "You should have told me," went on Naab. "I couldn't. I'm only human." "Well, well, I'm not blaming you, Hare. I had hot blood once, but I'm afraid the desert will not be large enough for you and Snap. She's pledged to him. You can't change the Mormon Church. For the sake of peace I'd give you Mescal if I could. Snap will either have her or kill her. I'm going to hunt this desert in advance of him, because he'll trail her like a hound. It would be better to marry her to him than to see her dead." "I'm not so sure of that." "Hare, your nose is on a blood scent like a wolf's. I can see. I've always seen. Well, remember, it's man to man between you now." During this talk they were winding under Echo Cliffs, gradually climbing and working up to a level with the desert, which they presently attained at a point near the head of the canyon. The trail swerved to the left, following the base of the cliffs. The track of Noddle and Wolf were plainly visible in the dust. Hare felt that if they ever let out into the immense airy space of the desert, all hope of finding Mescal must be abandoned. They trailed the tracks of the dog and burro to Bitter Seeps, a shallow spring of alkali, and there lost all track of them. The path up the cliffs to the Navajo ranges was bare, time worn in solid rock, and showed only the imprint of age. Desertward, the ridges of shale, the washes of copper earth, baked in the sun, gave no sign of the fugitive's course. August Naab shrugged his broad shoulders and pointed his horse to the cliff. It was dusk when they surmounted it. They camped in the lee of an uplifting crag. When the wind died down, the night was no longer unpleasantly cool, and Hare, finding August Naab uncommunicative and sleepy, strolled along the rim of the cliff, as he had been wont to do in the sheep herding days. He could scarcely disassociate them from the present, for the bittersweet smell of tree and bush, the almost inaudible sigh of breeze, the opening and shutting of the great white stars in the blue dome, the silence, the sense of the invisible void beneath him, all were thought-provoking parts of that past of which nothing could ever be forgotten. And it was a silence which brought much to the ear that could hear. It was a silence penetrated by faint and distant sounds, by mourning wolf or moan of wind in a splintered crag. Weird and low, in inarticulate voice, it wailed up from the desert, winding along the hollow trail, freeing itself in the wide air and dying away. He had often heard the scream of a lion and the cry of wildcat, but this was the strange sound of which August Naab had told him, the mysterious call of canyon and desert night. Daylight showed Echo Cliffs to be a vastly greater range than the sister plateau across the river. The roll of Cedar Level, the heave of craggy ridge, the dip of White Sage Valley gave this side a diversity wildly differing from the two steps of the Vermilion tableland. August Naab followed a trail leading back toward the river. For the most part, thick cedars hid the surroundings from Hare's view. Occasionally, however, he had a backward glimpse from a high point, or a wide prospect below, where the trail overlooked an oval hemmed-in valley. About midday, August Naab brushed through a thicket and came abruptly on a declivity. He turned to his companion with a wave of his hand. "The Navajo camp," he said. "Eschtah has lived there for many years. It's the only permanent Navajo camp I know. These Indians are nomads. Most of them live wherever the sheep lead them. This plateau ranges for 100 miles, farther than any white man knows, and everywhere in the valleys and green nooks will be found Navajo hogans. That's why we may never find Mescal." Hare's gaze traveled down over the tips of cedar and crag to a pleasant vale dotted with round mound-like white streaked hogans, from which lazy floating columns of blue smoke curled upward. Mustangs and burros and sheep browsed on the white patches of grass. Bright red blankets blazed on the cedar branches. There was slow, colorful movement of Indians passing in and out of their homes. The scene brought irresistibly to Hare the thought of summer, of long warm afternoons, of leisure that took no stock of time. On the way down the trail they encountered a flock of sheep driven by a little Navajo boy on a brown burro. It was difficult to tell which was the more surprised, the long-eared burro, which stood stock still, or the boy who first kicked and pounded his shaggy steed, and then jumped off and ran with black locks flying. Farther down, Indian girls started up from their tasks and darted silently into the shade of the cedars. August Naab whooped when he reached the valley, and Indian braves appeared to cluster round him, shake his hand and Hare's, and lead them toward the center of the encampment. The hogans, where the desert savages dwelt, were all alike, only the chief's was larger. From without, it resembled a mound of clay, with a few white logs, half embedded, shining against the brick red. August Naab drew aside a blanket hanging over a door and entered, beckoning his companion to follow. Inured as Hare had become to the smell and smart of wood smoke, for a moment he could not see, or scarcely breathe, so thick was the atmosphere. A fire, the size of which attested to the desert Indian's love of warmth, blazed in the middle of the hogan, and sent part of its smoke upward through a round hole in the roof. Eschtah, with blanket over his shoulders, his lean black head bent, sat near the fire. He noted the entrance of his visitors, but immediately resumed his meditative posture, and appeared to be unaware of their presence. Hare followed August's example, sitting down and speaking no word. His eyes, however, roved discreetly to and fro. Eschtah's 3 wives presented great difference in age and appearance. The eldest was a wrinkled, parchment-skinned old hag who sat sightless before the fire. The next was a solid, square squaw, employed in the task of combing a naked boy's hair with a comb made of stiff, thin roots tied tightly into a round bunch. Judging from the youngster's action and grimaces, this combing process was not a pleasant one. The third wife, much younger, had a comely face and long braids of black hair, of which evidently she was proud. She leaned on her knees over a flat slab of rock, holding in her hands a long oval stone. She rolled and mashed corn into meal. There were young braves, handsome in their bronze-skinned way, with bands binding their straight thick hair, silver rings in their ears, silver bracelets on their wrists, silver buttons on their moccasins. There were girls who looked up from their blanket weaving with shy curiosity, and then turned to their frames strung with long threads. Under their nimble fingers the wool-carrying needles slipped in and out, and the colored stripes grew apace. Then there were the younger boys and girls, all bright-eyed and curious, and babies sleeping on blankets. Where the walls and ceilings were not covered with buckskin garments, weapons, and blankets, Hare saw the white wood ribs of the hogan structure. It was a work of art, this circular house of forked logs and branches, interwoven into a dome, arched and strong, and all covered and cemented with clay. At a touch of August's hand, Hare turned to the old chief and awaited his speech. It came with the uplifting of Eschtah's head and the offering of his hand in the white man's salute. August's replies were slow and labored. He could not speak the Navajo language fluently, but he understood it. "The White Prophet is welcome," was the chief's greeting. "Does he come for sheep or braves, or to honor the Navajo in his home?" "Eschtah, he seeks the flower of the desert," replied August Naab. "Mescal has left him. Her trail leads to the bitter waters under the cliff, and then is as a bird's." "Eschtah has waited, yet Mescal has not come to him." "She has not been here?" "Mescal's shadow has not gladdened the Navajo's door." "She has climbed the crags or wandered into the canyons. The White Father loves her. He must find her." "Eschtah's braves and mustangs are for his friend's use. The Navajo will find her if she is not as the grain of drifting sand. But is the White Prophet wise in his years? Let the flower of the desert take root in the soil of her forefathers." "Eschtah's wisdom is great, but he thinks only of Indian blood. Mescal is half white, and her ways have been the ways of the white man. Nor does Eschtah think of the white man's love." "The desert has called. Where's the White Prophet's vision? White blood and red blood will not mix. The Indian blood pales in the white man's stream, or it burns red for the sun and the waste and the wild. Eschtah's forefathers, sleeping here in the silence, have called the desert flower." "It is true, but the white man is bound. He cannot be as the Indian. He does not content himself with life as it is. He hopes and prays for change. He believes in the progress of his race on earth. Therefore, Eschtah's white friends smelts Mescal. He has brought her up as his own. He wants to take her home, to love her better, to trust to the future." "The white man's ways are white man's ways. Eschtah understands. He remembers his daughter lying here. He closed her dead eyes and sent word to his white friend. He named the child for the flower that blows in the wind of silent places. Eschtah gave his granddaughter to his friend. She has been the bond between them. Now she is flown, and the White Father seeks the Navajo. Let him command. Eschtah has spoken." Eschtah pressed into Naab's service a band of young braves, under the guidance of several warriors who knew every trail of the range, every water hole, every cranny where even a wolf might hide. They swept the river end of the plateau, and working westward, scoured the levels, ridges, valleys, climbed to the peaks, and sent their Indian dogs into the thickets and caves. From Eschtah's encampment westward, the hogans diminished in number till only one here and there was discovered, hidden under a yellow wall or amid a clump of cedars. All the Indians met with were sternly questioned by the chiefs. Their dwellings were searched, and the ground about their water holes was closely examined. Mile after mile the plateau was covered by these Indians, who beat the brush and penetrated the fastness with a hunting instinct that left scarcely a rabbit burrow unrevealed. The days sped by, the circle of the sun arched higher, the patches of snow in high places disappeared, and the search proceeded westward. They camped where the night overtook them, sometimes near water and grass, sometimes in bare, dry places. To the westward the plateau widened, rugged ridges rose here and there, and seared crags split the sky like sharp saw teeth. After many miles of wild upranging, they reached the divide which marked the end of Eschtah's domain. Naab's dogged persistence and the Navajo's faithfulness carried them into the country of the Moki Indians, a tribe classed as slaves by the proud race of Eschtah. Here they searched the villages and ancient tombs and ruins, but of Mescal there was never a trace. Hare rode as diligently and searched as indefatigably as August, but he never had any real hope of finding the girl. To hunt for her, however, despite its hopelessness, was a melancholy satisfaction, for never was she out of his mind. Nor was the month's hard riding with the Navajos without profit. He made friends with the Indians and learned to speak many of their words. Then a whole host of desert tricks became part of his accumulating knowledge. In climbing the crags, in looking for water and grass, in loosing Silvermane at night, and in searching for him at dawn, in marking tracks on hard ground, in all the sight and feeling and smell of desert things, he learned much from the Navajos. The whole outward life of the Indian was concerned with the material aspect of nature: dust, rock, air, wind, smoke, the cedars, the beasts of the desert. These things made up the Indian's day. The Navajos were worshippers of the physical. The sun was their supreme god. In the mornings, when the gray of dawn flushed to rosy red, they began their chant to the sun. At sunset, the Navajos were watchful and silent, with faces westward. The Moki Indians also, Hare observed, had their morning service to the great giver of light. In the gloom of early dawn, before the pink appeared in the east and all was whitening gray, the Mokis emerged from their little mud and stone huts and sat upon the roof with blanketed and drooping heads. One day August Naab showed in few words how significant a factor the sun was in the lives of desert men. "We've got to turn back," he said to Hare. "The sun's getting hot, and the snow will melt in the mountains. If the Colorado rises too high, we can't cross." They were 2 days in riding back to the encampment. Eschtah received them in dignified silence, expressive of his regret. When their time of departure arrived, he accompanied them to the head of the nearest trail, which started down from Saw Weep Peak, the highest point of Echo Cliffs. It was the Navajos' outlook over the Painted Desert. "Mescal is there," said August Naab. "She's there with the slave Eschtah gave her. He leads Mescal. Who can follow him there?" The old chieftain reined in his horse beside the time-hollowed trail, and the same hand that waved his white friend downward swept up in slow, stately gesture toward the illimitable expanse. It was a warrior's salute to an unconquered world. Hare saw in his falcon eyes the still gleam, the brooding fire, the mystical passion that haunted the eyes of Mescal. The slave without a tongue is a wolf. He scents the trails and the waters. Eschtah's eyes have grown old, watching here, but he has seen no Indian who could follow Mescal's slave. Eschtah will lie there, but no Indian will know the path to the place of his sleep. Mescal's trail is lost in the sand. No man may find it. Eschtah's words are wisdom. Look! To search for any living creature in that borderless domain of colored dune, of shifting cloud of sand, of purple curtain shrouding mesa and dome, appeared the vainest of all human endeavors. It seemed the veritable rainbow realm of the sun. At first only the beauty stirred Hare. He saw the copper belt close under the cliffs, the white beds of alkali and washes of silt farther out, the wind-plowed canyons and dust-encumbered ridges ranging west and east, the scalloped slopes of the flat tableland rising low, the tips of volcanic peaks leading the eye beyond the veils and vapors hovering over blue clefts and dim line of level lanes, and so on, out to the vast unknown. Then Hare grasped a little of its meaning. It was a sun-painted, sun-governed world. Here was deep and majestic nature, eternal and unchangeable. But it was only through Eschtah's eyes that he saw its parched slopes, its terrifying desolateness, its sleeping death. When the old chieftain's lips opened, Hare anticipated the austere speech, the import that meant only pain to him, and his whole inner being seemed to shrink. "The White Prophet's child of red blood is lost to him," said Eschtah. "The flower of the desert is as a grain of drifting sand." CHAPter 13